Imagine you're an astronaut out drifting in deep space. When you throw a rock as hard as you can, what's going to happen to that rock? Well, you would think that it would continue with constant velocity.
One thing is for sure, I would never want to be an astronaut just floating out in space. That's one of the scariest things, probably.
In a straight line. That's just Newton's first law. But what actually happens is it eventually slows down and stops. So why does this happen? Where did all the rock's energy go?
And that's very strange because I thought of that like you would toss a rock into space, that it would just continuously keep going no matter what until it probably would run into something, right, and bounce off of it or something. But man, that's kind of crazy.
At the turn of the 20th century, the problem of energy conservation baffled some of the greatest minds, including Albert Einstein. Einstein came up with a possible solution. But
I think Albert Einstein was definitely one of the smartest people they had around back then, way back then. Because if he was around now with the computers and everything that we have now, like AI and stuff, I think that he would have been even more smart and everything.
Then a little-known unpaid mathematician named Emmy Noether proved he was wrong. And in doing so, she created a whole new paradigm for physics, one that underlies all of particle physics and explains why anything is conserved.
You gotta be kidding me. A woman proved that Einstein was wrong about something? Not to say that a woman can't do that or anything, but man, I would be shocked even if a dude did that, dang.
It all started in 1915 at the University of Göttingen, where Einstein was giving 6 lectures on his new theory of gravity, what would become the general theory of relativity. The lectures were well received, but Einstein hadn't yet settled on the final form of the field equations.
I would think everybody's pretty, familiar with the relativity of theory,
problem he was facing was how to show that total energy was conserved in his new theory.
This is the whole beginning of this story, right? Classically, they thought they had this understanding of what the energy of a gravitational field was. All of a sudden, with these new equations, they go, where is it? Is it in the curvature? Is it in the stress energy tensor? Where is the...
You know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of football back before they had face masks. They only had one bar going across their face, right? But then they started realizing that, that ain't the smartest move, so they started putting a lot more bars across the face and everything, and it became a real face protector for football players and everything. So it's really no different. Like one person came up with the idea to put one bar, and then the next person came up with an even better idea to put 2 bars,
The term that we're looking for.
Einstein suggested that the principle of conservation of energy, long established as a bedrock of physics, might hold the key to working out the correct field equations. In the audience, legendary mathematician David Hilbert was intrigued. So he started to look for the energy conservation equations in Einstein's new theory. But the best he could find was a set of equations known as the Bianchi identities. They showed that energy was conserved, but only in a completely empty universe. So for one like ours, filled with stuff, they seemed useless.
See, would I have done the same thing that Albert Einstein did back then if I was Albert Einstein? Probably not, right? Because I didn't have the mind like Albert Einstein has. You know what I mean? I ain't probably that smart, but at the same time, they actually said that his brain was the size of 2 humans together, right? Or something like that. Like he had a abnormal bigger brain than a lot of different humans. So that's something to take into consideration. But would I have done the same thing? Probably not.
Hilbert was stumped.
Fortunately, he knew just the person for the job. His new assistant, Emmy Noether.
From an early age, Noether had dreamed of following the footsteps of her father, a mathematics professor at the University of Erlangen. She got special permission to attend lectures at the university, but they refused to admit her as an official student.
How do they even know that about somebody that grew up around that time? Because it's not like they had computers like social media that was keeping up with their every single move. Like what, do they gather information by paperwork that they had back then? Because I would even imagine that it would be hard to find paperwork that they had, because I mean, it's so long ago. Like, it's not like they probably kept everything in files like they do today, even.
The Erlangen Academic Senate held that the admission of women would overthrow all academic order. So, in 1903, she spent a semester at Göttingen instead. There, she learned about a new way to approach geometry.
I tell you what's crazy about this. One thing that I did notice in school is that the women definitely wrote better than all the guys, like, for sure. Most of them, for sure. And they also made better grades than a lot of the guys. So that is something to take into consideration whenever thinking about this situation right here.
Using symmetry. Symmetry is one of those ideas that's easy to recognize, but harder to describe.
If I align a mirror on this triangle like so, then it looks the same as without the mirror. And that's because this is an axis of symmetry. Reflections about this axis leave the triangle unchanged. And the same thing happens if I put the mirror like this, or if I orient the mirror like this. So this triangle has...
So basically, I feel like all he was doing right there was creating different ways to show a triangle by using a mirror.
3 axes of symmetry. Now, mathematicians generalize the idea of symmetry further to be any action you can take that leaves an object unchanged. So something else I could do is I could rotate this triangle by 120 degrees, or by 240 degrees, or by 360 degrees.
I mean, but, he's using a triangle. That would work for a square also, or rectangle, or what other shape they got out there? I don't know. Maybe not a circle, because if you turn around a circle, it's just going to remain a circle, but yeah.
Degrees. Together, these 6 actions capture all the symmetries of the equilateral triangle.
But you can also have more abstract symmetries, for example, with a mathematical function. If I shift this function up or down by some constant amount, call it a, then all of its y values will change. But if I differentiate that function, I get the slope, and that remains unchanged regardless of whatever constant is added. So you can add any constant to this function, and its derivative always stays the same.
Right. Well, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me, and, it's very surprising to me, but at the same time, it's not surprising to me, because if you have one shape, a square, no matter which way you turn the square, it's going to remain a square, right? Because you could look at it one way and it's still a square, and you could look at it another way and it still would be the square. So, having all kind of graphs trying to show that and everything, it kind of don't make no sense, because we all already know that already. But I mean, same thing goes for a triangle, right? You could put a triangle upside down and then look at it upside down and it's still a triangle. So, yeah.
So there's a kind of translation symmetry. And unlike the symmetries of the triangle, this is a continuous symmetry, meaning you can shift it by any amount you like. Over the next 12 years, Noether became a leading expert on symmetry. She became only the second woman in Germany to earn a PhD in mathematics.
Wow. Well, I don't understand something. Why we didn't learn anything about her whenever we grew up in school? I don't understand this.
And she used this expertise to help Hilbert and Einstein with their problem of energy conservation. The issue had bothered Einstein so much that he proposed a new conservation equation. It said that if we add...
I bet Einstein was probably thinking, oh, you want to test my theory? Oh, all right, but I'm going to come up with an even better theory for you to test out, since you want to test something.
Add together the energy of matter and the energy of the gravitational field, then that total remains constant. Its change...
He probably said to himself, I'm going to come up with something that nobody understands.
...over time and space is zero. But when Noether saw this, she was convinced Einstein had made a fundamental mistake, because this equation disregards the foundational principle that general relativity is built on.
And it also goes against astronauts being in outer space, right? Because whenever they're in outer space, it's not like they are aging a lot less than the people on Earth. They are aging less, but it's not a whole lot less than the people on Earth. You get what I mean? So it's not like is it because if it was zero time in space, I would think that people that went up to space would not age at all, right?
10 years earlier, in 1905, Einstein had introduced his special theory of relativity, and it was built on the idea that the laws of physics were independent of your frame of reference. But so far, Einstein had only applied this principle to inertial frames of reference. Those are frames that move at a constant speed.
He began wondering what would it take to generalize that, to consider more general states of motion. After all, trains on the platform. He loved trains. Trains would speed up or slow down, people, moving around the world.
And it's really no difference from going back and forth, like whenever you running and you come to a stop that, you ran and you went and you stopped, right? So that's like a motion that ended. Or if you say like you throw a marble across the floor, like it's gonna keep going until it hits something and stops, right? Or it's gonna keep going until it just slows down and stops, right? Because it's not like it has this motion that's gonna last forever, just like whenever you spin a little, like if you was to spin a marble on the floor and watch it spin, it's not like it's gonna just continually spin all day long. No, it's gonna spin fast for a little while, and then it's gonna slow down.
World don't only move at a single constant speed forever.
In 1907, he wrote, "Is it conceivable that the principle of relativity also applies to systems that are accelerated relative to each other?" This made him wonder, perhaps his principle could also be applied to accelerating and rotating frames that move in any way in general. That's the general in general relativity. So Einstein got to work on this largely intellectual pursuit.
But then, as he was daydreaming in the patent office, he had what he called the happiest thought of his life.
He imagined the window cleaner at the top of the opposite building falling off.
Oh, that would be terrible, right? Cleaning a window on somebody's building that's not yours, and then you fall off, and then you get hurt or something like that, bro. That would never be a good situation to be in, right there, bro. Bro, like that dude might be making like 10 an hour cleaning a window, man. And that's a sad situation. You never want to see nobody go through nothing like that, for sure.
And Einstein realized that while the man was falling, he wouldn't feel his own weight. He would be weightless, and anything he dropped on his way down would remain stationary relative to him. It would be just as if he was floating in outer space.
It's ironic. We would have said, oh, he's being pulled down to the ground because the gravity of the Earth is exerting a force. But Einstein said, while that person is in motion, what we would call free fall motion, they would actually feel no gravity at all. There must be some equivalence between accelerated motion and the action of gravity. So Einstein arrived at what he called the equivalence principle.
If you were stuck in a rocket in outer space, accelerating at...
I would think that if you was in outer space by yourself, like, and you accidentally drifted too far away from your spaceship, I would think that you would just keep going. Like, that's what I always thought in my life. Like if you were in outer space and you were and you accidentally got too far away from the ship or something like that, I always thought that you would just keep going the same way through space forever, and it wouldn't end. But I might be wrong about that. I'm really not sure.
9.8 meters per second squared, then it would be the exact same as if you were standing on the surface of Earth.
And this was huge, because it meant that if Einstein could figure out how to understand accelerating frames, then he didn't just get a more general theory, he would also have a new theory of gravity.
But to achieve this, Einstein needed to make sure the laws of gravity had the same form in every frame of reference.
I would really like to know what gave Einstein his first thought. Like the simplest thing that he had in his mind at the time, that he might have came up with all of these things. Like, I want to know his first simple thought of what happened, like, and what led up to the real hard, equations that he came up with? Like, what was the simple thoughts that gave him the ideas to come up with those equations? Because those equations today that he came up with back then are still, very, very famous and very, very all there to people. It's not like he came up with something that's crazy or nothing like that. He came up with something that actually makes sense. So it's not like it's keeping things hidden or anything like that. He really came up with ideas that nobody else came up with at the time, probably. And it's crazy to see how a woman came along and took his ideas that he had at the time later on, and made him even stronger and better and more accurate than even Einstein had made it, though. And that's kind of crazy to me because whenever I was coming up in school, I didn't learn anything about the woman that made Einstein's theories better and more accurate. All I ever heard about was how accurate and everything Einstein put down on paper and everything like that, like his mathematics and his relativity and all that. That's what I always heard. But yeah, that is really crazy.